Welcome to the Winters Museum and the Historical Society of Winters. And we're happy to see you all here today to take a look at our exhibit of veterans and to honor our veterans. And to begin with, we're going to have a little talk by let's see, who's going to talk about the exhibit? Okay. You are. Okay.
Gloria. Those of you who don't know me, I'm Gloria. You all know me. I won't talk long, but I just wanted to kind of explain what our thinking was behind this particular exhibit. And Rob Coman and I kind of have curated.
Sure, that's the correct term.
With a lot of help from our volunteers in the museum and all of you, because this exhibit, this is our 5th exhibit, and I was just so pleased that I put out the call. I said we're honoring Winters veterans, and people just kept bringing in pictures or artifacts from their own service or from the service of their spouse or their parent. And so every one of these pictures and artifacts that you see all the way from World War I through the Iraqi War, the Gulf War. They were all brought in by individuals in the community, so this really is a community exhibit that we've had, and it's been a thrill to keep putting things up as people bring in things. Robbie always finds a place to put stuff, and it's good at that, huh?
You didn't see our garage.
And, so the arrangement that we did, our exhibits evolve. So when we have an exhibit, we always accept stuff as it comes in. But the thinking behind this one was to first be a little bit chronological with our wars. So we even had a picture of someone who's buried in the cemetery, I think, here, from the Civil War. Wow. And then, let's see, Al Graf's out here. We have some things from World War I from Al Graf's father, and then we went into World War II, and certainly we have a number of people that served in World War II, and we'll hear more about that in a couple of minutes. And then, we had quite a few from the Korean War, and then just people who served proudly in the service, but not necessarily during wartime, because we always think of veterans, we think of wars. Well, no, we have veterans from all the time. And then we went on to Vietnam and the Gulf, the Iraqi and the Gulf War. So that was part of how we started our exhibit. And then what I found was that there were families. And so I tried to group the families. We got Jean Gale here, who will talk more. Got all the Gale boys up there. We had, let's see, we have even the doctors. Ernie and Corbin are going to be over there. And there's Rubio brothers. There's, so it just seemed like there were the Grafs, Scott's here, and his father. So there just seemed like there were so many generational groupings that we could do, and that was a part of how we tended to organize this. And then the artifacts were those are amazing. We have people's uniforms, Wayne Ireland and Frank Ramus and Don and my dad's shirt. We have people's medals, we have people's awards, Bronze Stars, Purple Hearts, and so we just wanted to tell that story and honor veterans from Winters. So that was the impetus of this particular exhibit. And yeah, well, this has been a popular one, and it's been so nice to have people come back.
Do you still need more stuff? Are you still looking for more?
Well, this is going to be up because we're waiting for this art exhibit to happen, so it'll be up for another few weeks. We always add things, and we'll bring it back, and so it's always nice to have things. People can either donate things, or they can just put them on loan. And if it's pictures, we always can scan pictures so that we have those as, those pictures in our records. So that's what we did with this exhibit. Rich?
Okay, thank you, Gloria. Well, we're gonna hear from a number of veterans here in a few minutes, but I thought I would start by telling you about my illustrious naval career and all the hardships that I endured. I grew up on a farm just 4 miles north of Winters.
What's your name?
Yeah, I'm Rich Rominger. So, grew up on the farm 4 miles north of town, graduated from Winters High School in 1944. So the Second World War was still going on. But I was only 16 years old at the time, and I wanted to go to UC Davis, but the campus was closed because the Army Signal Corps had taken it over for a training base. So the only college in the area was the Sacramento Junior College. So I went to Sacramento Junior College for 1 year, and then I enlisted in the Navy of June of 1945. And I tried to get in the Naval Air Corps, but I couldn't pass the colorblind test. So I ended up in what we called a B6 program, and that was a program where they said, well, after boot camp, we'll send you on to school, and then you can become an admiral. So I went to the Great Lakes Naval Training Station, just north of Chicago, on the shore of Lake Michigan, for boot camp. And the only injury that I encountered in my naval career happened in boot camp, when one of my buddies, we used to wear leggings that you had to lace up on the outside. Well, he forgot one day and he laced them up on the inside. When he was running out on the drill field, his leggings caught and he fell down and broke his arm. That's the extent of the injuries that I encountered. Well, being close to Chicago, when we had a day or two to leave, we would go into Chicago. And a buddy and I would go to the art galleries, because that's where we figured we could meet the high-class girls. And it worked. The families of one of them invited me to Thanksgiving dinner. So what more could you ask? The only ship I ever got on was on a training ship on Lake Michigan during boot camp, where they took us out for a day and we had aerial gunnery practice shooting at targets thrown behind an airplane. Well, the war was over before I finished boot camp. So that's what happened. So then they said, well, we'll keep our promise and we'll send you on to school, or we'll transfer you to a base in your home state, and you can wait there to be discharged. Well, I took that option since I was ready to go back to UC Davis. And so they sent us, I was transferred to Camp Shoemaker, if any of you ever remember that. It was just down the Bay Area, east of Oakland, right across the highway from Livermore. It's no longer there. In fact, after a while after it was a naval base, it was a prison. It was a county prison for a while. But then it's no longer there. So I was there for another 18 months, mostly spent time making out other people's discharges. And eventually I typed out my own discharge. So I was in the Navy for 14 months. And the best part of that deal was then I had the GI Bill, and I got GI Bill at UC Davis. 3 years, they paid all my expenses. How about that? Well, when I was at Davis, I played trombone in the Aggie band and played third base on the baseball team. Any of you know they're playing baseball right now. I went to the baseball game yesterday. It lasted 24 innings. It was 2 days. They started it on Friday and finished it on Saturday. The Aggies finally won it in the 24th inning, 4-3. Well, in the fall of 1947, I'd been at Davis for a year. A graduate of Davis High School, entered UC Davis by the name of Evelyn Rao. And 4 years later, we were married. Well, then the Korean War came along, and I was still in the Naval Reserve, but I was farming and had a family, and so I was not recalled. But some of my buddies from boot camp who were single were recalled to the Korean War. And one of them wrote Evelyn and said, "Send cookies, I'm taking your husband's place." Okay, that's the extent of my career in the Navy, and we've been married this year for 69 years. Okay, now we'll hear some of the real heroes. The first veteran I have on the list is Don Davis. Don, tell us some about your experience.
Well, I'm still actively serving out at Travis. Be 30 years on the 13th of this month. So I grew up in Ogallala, Nebraska, and tried joining the Navy twice, and right out of high school, and they wouldn't promise me the job I wanted. So I joined the Air Force and got shipped off in March of 1990 to San Antonio for 3 months, going to 6 weeks down there, and then I did some time up at Shempp learning to do I did air conditioning in the Air Force. I thought I was going to do something with airplanes. I did air conditioning on the Air Force. Got stationed at Travis Air Force Base. Worked out there. Got sent to Turkey for 3 months to do provide comfort. That was part of the Northern Watch, and worked on air conditioning on tents there. Then I got back to Travis. Got into some trouble. My boss says to me, he says, "Hey, it'd be good if you left the base again." So then I went to 3 months to Saudi Arabia and worked on air conditioning over there. Then I got back, met a girl, and decided I thought it'd be time to get out. We moved back to Ogallala, Nebraska. She cried every single day we lived there. I said, "If you can get your job back, we'll move back to California." So she did. And I was using my GI Bill going to school. And one of my friends came up to me and he says, "Hey, Don, do you know that enlisted guys flew in the Air Force?" I'm like, I didn't know enlisted people flew in the Air Force. So he goes, "Yeah," and he goes, Barbosa, a guy we worked with in civil engineering, his wife was in charge of the reserve units out there. So I enlisted him there, became a 141 loadmaster. They retired in 97, flew all over the world in the 141 as a loadmaster. They retired in 97. And my chief came up to me and says, "Either get out and find a new job." So I did. So I started flying on the KC-10s as a boom operator out there in 97. I decided that flying around the world was more fun than going to school, so I dropped out of college and did that. And in 2000, I went back onto full-time reservist job out there, so I have to go to base every day. So went back out there, went to Diego Garcia, flew missions out of there, refueling bombers going into Afghanistan, and then came back and I spent months and months and months in United Arab Emirates. In fact, I was just there November and December of this year, and I've got hundreds of hours flying over Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria, and never touching the ground there. So now I'm, my rank is E9, I'm a chief out at the base, and I've got 34 guys and gals underneath me, and I've got 7 more years to go. I can't do anything else. Nobody else ever refuels, so that's what I do.
Thank you. Next up is Scott Miles.
Scott Miles, Major, United States Marine Corps, retired. I spent 20 years serving our country in the United States Marine Corps as an infantry officer and then as a reconnaissance officer. I've served everywhere, including Diego Garcia. I was with the Marine Security Force Company, Diego Garcia,
Isn't that
protecting the
it's
MPS
paradise
shipping.
on Earth?
It is. I'm a diver, so it's the best diving in the world, best kept secret. I've been in combat everywhere. I mean, literally everywhere as a reconnaissance Marine and infantry officer. Anywhere that there's Honduras, Nicaragua, the Philippines, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Yemen. People don't realize that after the Gulf War, there was a conflict with Yemen, and it was pretty bad. But I was on active duty when I came here to Winters. A lot of people don't realize that. I was the I&I for 23rd Marine Regiment in San Bruno, in the 2nd Battalion, 23rd Marines. And I was selected for promotion to Lieutenant Colonel, and I was given orders to go to Cuba to get Mo, and family came first. So I retired right here. Yeah. Thank you. This woman, toughest job in the Marine Corps. Corps wife. Take care of everything all.
Okay, next, Rodney Orosco. Where are you, Rodney?
Over here. I got a phone call from a friend. He said, "Hey, I just got activated. This is Iraqi Freedom 2. And Scott Hunter." And I said, "Well, good luck, man." We were in the National Guard out of Sacramento together. Brand new second lieutenants. And he said, "Well, I can't go." I said, "They called you, Scott. You have to go." So, "Well, my wife doesn't want me to go." We just got back from training for 4 months, and he was on the rock with his wife. "What am I going to do?" I said, "I'll tell you what, Scott. I'll go for it." So he's like, "You'll do that?" I said, "Yeah, I'll do that." So I called our commander. I said, "Ma'am, this is Orosco. I'm going to go for Scott." And there's a pause. "Are you sure?" I said, yeah, I'll go. So I volunteered to go to Iraqi Freedom, and I was there in Iraq for 14 months. So 14 months. I was in Babylon, and then Diwania, and then Najaf. Was hosted by the Marines in Fallujah. Great host. Thank you for all that. Yeah, fabulous. Anyway, so then I got out, and I had enough. It was great. I love serving my country, but I got out for one reason. I remember I took a phone call. There was an AT&T tent in Babylon, and there were certain times you call, so usually at night. So I remember taking a phone call, and I remember talking to Julie, and I could hear my kids in the background. And that was my favorite part, was just hearing them in the background. I didn't want to talk to them, they didn't know what to say, but I could hear them in the background, just being kids, running around, little kids. But I hung up the phone. I remember I was walking back to my hooch, and then all of a sudden, the sky lights up, and then bombs start falling. And people are running around, and I was tired of that. So I just went to my hooch and fell asleep. I mean, if I was going to die, I was going to die. And I remember laying there thinking, this could be the last time I'm on this earth. And I was happy because I got to hear my kids. Then I realized I may never see them again. And so luckily I didn't die. No one died that night. And then when I got home, I told my commander, I said, I had a great time. I tried to serve, but I'm done. And so I resigned my commission. I got out. And I was never sorry I did that. And I was always sorry. I was always grateful I served. But family came first. And I thought I'd never seen them again. It was too much. So that was my time.
Scott Graf.
I'm Scott Graf, Scotty Graf, little Scotty Graf. as people like me. I grew up in Winters. Yeah, I was one who grew up right down there on Russell Street, at the end of Russell Street. So one time there were 3 Grafs on Russell Street. There was my Uncle Jack at the corner of Russell and 4th, right there. It's that house right there where you go. If you miss it, you'll run into their living room. There was Mom's house on 435 Russell Street, and my cousin Alfred's Graf at the end of Russell Street. And so I guess we've got a lot of Grafs here. Not as many as from Martin, but we've got a lot of Grafs. Anyway, I graduated in 1968 from Winters High School, and decided to join the Army right after that. It was at the height of the Vietnam War. Things were happening when Vietnam War was the #1 show at 6 o'clock in the evening on the news. And so I got there, and I went to basic at Fort Lewis, and ended up basic at Fort Lewis, went to AIT at Fort Sam Houston, and then I went to infantry school at Fort Ord, and went to jump school at Fort Benning, and because I wanted to be a paratrooper, like my uncle. My uncle Jim was there. He was with 101st about 2 years before I went there. And then I ended up I was chosen to either go to rigger school or pathfinding. And I thought that the mortality rate of pathfinders wasn't very good. So I opted for rigger school. Because I figured, well, if I go to rigger school, I'll be able to stay in some place like the Trang or Saigon or something like that, where I won't be shot at. And I went to Vietnam, stayed in Trang for probably about 2 months, and then I was flying loads and driving loads between Cam Ranh Bay and into Trang. And sometimes we would fly loads out into the various A camps on the Cambodian-Laotian border. When I'm flying out, one time I'm flying out there, and all of a sudden I hear the ping, 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 ping. And then the flight crew was sitting there saying, "Hey, the camp's getting hit." And I thought, oh my God, these people really are trying to kill me, aren't they? And well, what we did was we went in and we did what's called a drop and hop. We went in there, just kind of level off the ground, dropped off the load, and then hopped and got back. And then about a week after that, I got assigned to a special ops unit up in Da Nang, CCN. And I figured what we did there was we would support recon teams going in and out of the field. And what I thought was just support turned out to be is that I was flying there. And what we do is we go on the helicopter, go and pick up the, infiltrate the teams, and then pick them up afterwards. And I got shot at. There was one time we were coming into a particularly hot LZ, and there was fire coming up. I could see the RPGs coming. One of them came and flew, and it just kind of went above the rotors of the chopper. The chopper destabilized a little bit and hit the ground. And I grabbed the M60 and started firing out into the tree line, which is probably about a block. You know, if you look at it, it's about a block from here. I started firing out into that tree line, and 2 guys were coming out of there. And one of them was wounded, and one guy was picking up the other guy. And you know how you just react? And I just jumped out, and it wasn't that far. It was probably about from here to the wall over there. I just jumped out and pulled those guys back and threw them back into the chopper. And I gave you another medal for that. So anyway, you know, my time in Vietnam was pretty much that. After that, I was discharged from the Army, and I ended up coming back here to Winters. And then during that time, I got a little bit nuts for about 10 years. I kind of floundered and went around. I think I got married twice during that time. I had a couple, but it took me about 35 years after leaving Vietnam before I decided to work on my PTSD, which is a real thing for us combat veterans. I mean, any veteran that's been in a war zone, there's just some form of PTSD that they got. And so I decided to start working on that because I was starting to have the nightmares were starting to come back. And I was getting, what I call it jungle happy, is that you walk along and you see something and you get a little bit of a flashback. And I was starting to feel that, and I couldn't figure out why is that happening now? It hadn't happened for almost 20 years. I mean, I knew it was there, I knew this stuff was there, I had nightmares, but these nightmares were really, really vivid. And couldn't understand why. And so I went and started getting counseling, and started going to VA, and got evaluated through VA and found out I was more screwed up than I thought I was.
You could have asked us.
So anyway, but during that time when I got back, I was an alcohol and drug counselor for 30 years. I worked in everything from residential counseling to I worked as a liaison between Colusa County Jail and the counseling center there. I worked in inpatient treatment or outpatient treatment. And probably the best job I had was working 5 years with homeless outreach, and I worked with homeless mentally ill for 5 years out of West Sacramento. And then after that, I worked with a DUI program, DUI drug court program out of Yolo County. And finally, in 2010, I decided maybe it might be nice if I retired. And so I talked to my wife about it, and she said yes. I got a chance to retire, so I think I was like, Jesus, we'll do it. And so I've been retired now for almost 10 years. I'm still in recovery, haven't drank for 41 years, and so I haven't used anything. The only thing I take now is Advil, probably. But like I said, that last 10 years were pretty crazy for me. And I'd like to welcome home all of you veterans. That's the thing that we do. And welcome home, Scott.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you so much. Oh yeah. Well, I got into acting got into drama when I was at Tacoma. I ended up at Fort Lewis on a second enlistment, and after a year they asked me to leave because my moral fiber wasn't what they wanted. Well, I just decided to leave. I just left for a month. I just said I don't want to do this anymore. So because a couple of things happened. I was out doing medic duty there was a Ranger battalion, and they were jumping, and there was another people with airborne, and you have to make a jump every 3 months to get your pay. And women were jumping then. God, go figure. Yeah, women were jumping, and so I had like, by that time I had like 68 regular Army jumps. I had about 35 skydiving jumps, and I did 2 training jumps when I was in Vietnam. And I had my patches and everything. And this whack comes running up to me. She says, "Hey, leg!" Leg is not a very good term when you say to someone who was airborne. And she said, "Hey, leg." And I turned around and I said, "You see these jump wings with the star on it? You see this patch at Special Forces? And I've got more jumps in that parachute than you've got in your underwear." And so I quickly went to my APAC and drank a bunch of triple hydrate. Because at that time, that was my second enlistment. Well, what happened is after that, I just said, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't have my honorable discharge, so I just left. I just left for 3 weeks, and then they finally, got me back. And my commanding officer, which was kind of funny, was when I got to that unit, he was a guy I knew from Vietnam. And at that time, he was an enlisted man, and then he turned out and went through, OCS and did all that other stuff. It was kind of like, "What are you doing here? Well, what are you doing here?" And it ended up that, he asked me to leave the Army. So I left, and what happened was I got into recovery, started doing this, and like anybody who gets into recovery who's an alcoholic and drug addict, we become counselors. Because all of a sudden, we're going to save the world. We know how to do it. So I became a counselor, started working in a detox facility. And then what happened, I went to Tacoma Community College. Every now and then you got to bring me back. Mission control to Scott, you're free for reentry, you got to bring me back to Earth. And I started taking a drama class. And what happened was I went to this class, and I was about a minute late for the class, and the instructor said, "Now everybody be sure and go and audition for this play." And I thought, oh crap, I got to go play. Well, it's a drama class for crying out loud. Of course you do. And so I went there and I did it, and I got one of the leads. And my part is that I get up there at the beginning of the show, and I kind of tie everything together. I got this 2-page monologue that I got to go through. It took me forever to try to memorize it. And my director sat there and said, "Don't think of what you're going to say, think of what you're going to say." And I said, "What?" He says, "You're thinking of lines, don't think of lines. Think of what's in there." He says, "The audience doesn't know what you're supposed to say." Probably the worst advice I ever got. Because I got up there, and I went up there, and all of a sudden I went blank. And I looked out there, and my friends are in the audience, and everything else, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, I'm going to run off this stage, never come back, go back down to Winners, and never ever set foot on a stage again, or I'm going to fake it. And I faked it. And I got such a rush. I got the same rush I got when I was jumping out of airplanes. I said, "Wow, this is great!" And I still get that rush. And so I started doing that when I was in Tacoma. I did acting when I was in Tacoma. I came back here, and I started getting involved in the play here. I was with a comedy improv group for 10 years, and I was with a comedy group in Washington for 5 years. So, and I still love it, by the way. And anybody that wants to get the monsters out, go out and do that, because I found out is that acting, what it did, it got me out of myself. It let me be creative, and my photography let me show my creative side. And so, anyway, I've been rambling. Rambling's I'm an old man, I always say. So, anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Another veteran who grew up in Winters, Gale.
You can stay seated if you'd like.
Well, I can't top that. It's an impossibility to top that, right? Okay, number one, like I said, born and raised here. The youngest of 10. Got 3 brothers right up there. They served in World War II. I was too young. So I went to work when I got out of high school. I went to work for PG&E. Started hiking poles and doing all that. Come home one day. Korean War was going pretty good. I told my dad and mom, I'm gonna quit PG&E, I'm gonna go into the Navy. So, off I went. Went through boot camp, went through radio school. I turned out to be a radioman. Went up to Korea, Busan Harbor, I went aboard a minesweeper. A minesweeper is a very, very short, small ship, probably not over 50-something feet long, complement of about 50 people. I spent 18 months there. I came home. You gotta go home for shore duty. Oh, that was happening. Come home for 2 weeks leave. And I went back. I got shore duty. I was up in the Aleutian Islands for 18 months. and I went aboard a ship up there. And it was good. It was all good. It was some pretty, I don't even want to talk about it, but up there in Korea was not a very nice thing. Saw a lot of stuff. But anyway, those guys up there, I was powdering hell up when I was going. I mean, I'd go around and my brother Donnie and my brother Robert up there met. They were both stationed over in the Burma and China theater, and they met. Yeah. My brother Donnie would see my brother Robert fly over. He had the number on his ship, on his airplane, and my brother would give him the tip, and he'd go up and come back. That was quite a deal. And then my brother Joe, he quit school. He quit school and went in the Navy. And he got in there just in time for the kamikaze stuff. He said he couldn't believe all the stuff was over there. So they had it pretty rough, a lot rougher than I had it. But I want to thank everybody and all the other veterans in here. God bless you all. Amen. Oh. Oh yeah. He's that to Billy.
I'm a Cold War, I was a Cold War kid. And after I graduated from Winters High in '59, went down to Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo for a semester. And I figured at the end of the semester it just wasn't for me. And I didn't know really what I wanted to do. And my dad sat me down and gave me a talking to. He said, well, you're coming home, you're gonna go to work if you're not gonna go back to school, or you can go and get your service out of the way. So I said, okay, well, what do we do there? And he says, just go over to the draft office in Woodland and talk to them and see what they would suggest. So what they told me was that if I volunteered for the draft, I could go in for 2 years. But there would be no choices about what it is or whatever I became when I got into the service. It would be just like pulling somebody off the street saying, okay, you're in the Army now. So I said, well, okay, what are the other choices? And they said, well, if you go in for 4 years, you could get a chance of getting shot at. And if you go in, you can go, and because you've been in college, you could probably go to OCS. And I said, well, what's that? And he said, well, if you pass all the tests, you're an officer. Well, I said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll volunteer. And so I did. So in March of 1960, I left and went to Fort Ord. And I had my basic there, and my testing showed me that I know too much about electricity. Well, obviously, when your dad's the PD manager here, you kind of follow around for all of these years, learning all about electricity. So I learned about electricity, and I scored very high in that. So they sent me to communication school. Communication school was fine. You climbed poles and threw balls back and forth while you're sitting up at the top of a 50-foot pole. And these kind of things that obviously I could tell I was not going to be using an error on that. And then from that, I was sent to Fort Dix, New Jersey. And they said, okay, then they give you one more chance to enlist for a longer period. And they said that all the 4-year guys that were enlisting would go to Korea. The other guys, the 2 years, would be going sent to Germany. So I said, hey, I like the Germany deal, so I'll go that. So that's what I did. And so they took us to the Naval Yard in New York and put us on the USS Patch, and off to Germany I went. We'll stop in Southampton and on to Hamburg. That was a ride too. I'd never been on the sea like that before in a troop ship. And the Patch was a World War II and Korean age ship, and it was fully loaded. And 2 days out of New York, we hit a North Atlantic storm, and I had the chance to sit up on the top, on the deck, and watch the whole bow of the ship disappear into the ocean, while we rode up and down, and the propellers would come out of the water, and the ship would shake like you couldn't believe. But anyway, we got to Hamburg, and they pulled a train up. Actually, a big passenger train was pulled right up on the dock, and we were loaded into the train. And as we went through Germany, we were dropped off at the various posts. My post was in Schweinfurt, which is located between Nuremberg and Frankfurt. It's on the Main River. And at the time that I got my orders, I was talking to Dr. Ernie Young. And he had flown a lot of missions over that area there during the war. And he says, oh, Schweinfurt, I remember Schweinfurt. We just bombed the shit out of those guys. And he said that was where they had all those ball bearing factories. So I said, okay, well, this ought to be very interesting. And I wasn't posted in town. They had a place called Coman Barracks outside of Schweinfurt. And it had been a Luftwaffe Air Force training center. And had aircraft hangars and runways, and the whole training area was to look like a village from the air so that it wouldn't get bombed during the war. And we had, I would say, some of the best quarters I'd ever seen. It was not the typical military stuff you get in the sea in most bases, at least here in this country. And they had parquet floors in all the sleeping rooms, marble in the halls, and all the buildings were all brick and stone and just beautifully put together. One day that was my duty station, and my job was to work telecommunications on artillery. Well, at the time that I went in, not unknown to me, I wasn't paying much attention to the news, but there was this constant buildup of tensions between the Allies, France, Britain, and the U.S. with the Soviet Union on Berlin. And the heat was growing. The Roddick was growing. Khrushchev was getting nastier and nastier. And we would take training missions to a place called Graf. And it was an area where all the units attached to Germany would go to practice artillery. And I had one incident there where we literally had a muzzle blast from a 155 howitzer that killed one member of the crew that was attached to us, along with badly injured the other crew members. It was an accident. It was just something that wasn't happening. And that brought the reality of the whole place to me. I didn't know that, you know, you kind of get, you don't feel that, you know, it's so right there at you until it actually happens. And then we had another incident where this happened in early 1961, where we were also had the 7th Cavalry attached to us. We were part of the 3rd Infantry. And the 7th Cav their job was to patrol the border up by Czechoslovakia. Well, the Czechs played dirty, and they did do dirty. What they did was that they would change the signs and change the road markings where the border was. And in this particular incident, the Cav Patrol was out. They had tanks, trucks, jeeps, and they pulled them in across the Czech border and shot them up. And I heard about this because when they started bringing back all the equipment from that border incident, well, after you go and look at a Jeep or you look at a truck and you see the blood all over it and everything else, we were never told how many people perished. And I wrote my mom a number of times saying, is there anything in the newspapers about this? And there was. So you kind of wonder, you know, at incidences, and I'm sure all of you who have had military experiences have wondered that yourself too. Why isn't this being made public? And I think maybe, you know, in retrospect, because of the tensions that were happening at that time over Berlin, they're just kept it as quiet as possible. So with that, on the 4th of June, the Khrushchev says, okay, we're not getting it resolved here. And he wanted all the allies to move out of Berlin, and he wanted to make Berlin a free city. Well, it was a free city on the Soviet scale, not on anybody else's scale. So it went on, and finally in August, he just said, okay, we're putting the wall up. Well, when that happened, we were all put on full alert. We considered, or our group was only considered to be a speed bump. If the East Germans decided that they were going to, not the East Germans, but the whole East blocks, decided they wanted to make a drive all the way to Normandy, they could do it. They could probably accomplish it. Because we just didn't have the resources and the manpower there at the time to stop them. We would put up a big fight and there would be lots of casualties, and we even had atomic weapons attached to it in the area as well. And that meant that these weapons were 155 caliber shells that could reach 7 to 8 miles into enemy territory and set off an atomic bomb. So, you know, when you start hearing about all this, the big alert happened one Saturday night for reasons I will never forget that. Guys have been down in town drinking at the guest houses, getting really blasted. And a lot of them scared because they really didn't know what was going to happen. We were all told to rendezvous in some farmer's field, not too far from where we were, actually. So all these guys hired a kite, get in their trucks, get in their self-propelled howitzers, and we run off into this farmer's field. Everybody going crazy, and the officers not being able to pull it into patrol. We had one big 5-ton truck turn over, and howitzer shells flying all over the place, and scaring everybody to death. Well, you know, what if these shells start going off? Well, they have safeties on them, so that wasn't that the problem there. So that was a very fearful night. And then we regrouped the next day, and we spent almost a week in the field waiting for orders what to do next. And finally, everybody was told to return to barracks. And by the 9th of November, they were putting the wall up in Berlin. And we were still staring at the possibilities of having to go and become that speed bus. But at the same time, I got orders to, because I had put down as loving to ski, and I got orders to go to Garmisch, to go to the rec center down in Garmisch on the zoo spits to join their ski patrol down there. So I went down there for almost a month. It was nice duty. And between that and being on a pistol team for a while and doing some competitions, and finally, because all of us were extended because of this crisis in that time period, I was supposed to be discharged in March of 1962, but that didn't happen. I was extended to April, and they wanted to hold people in service at that point to make sure that, you know, if there was any moves made by either the Soviets or the East Bloc countries, that we were ready for them, at least from a manpower standpoint. So after that, in April, end of April, another ship home, and I was discharged in New York.
Thank you.
Okay, another Vietnam veteran, Don Koepsell.
Oh, you put my name on the list. Well, I don't have much to say. I enlisted in the Marine Corps right out of, well, actually I was still in high school, and when I came home from the recruiting office, my mom and dad wanted to know why I had cut school. So I had to break down and tell them, and my mother wouldn't talk to me for at least 2 weeks after that. And my dad thought for sure that I had enlisted in the Air Force because he was a veteran of World War II and flew B-17s. When I said, no, I didn't enlist in the Air Force. And I knew that I wasn't going to enlist in the Army because a very close friend of mine had been killed in action a few months before, and I blamed the Army and the war. So I said no. So I got to Vietnam late in the war. I got there in 1970, and because it was so late in the war, I just didn't take things serious. Now that was a big mistake. I woke up when a sniper took a shot at me, and I didn't even realize I'd been shot at. You know, and the staff sergeant grabbed me and pulled me down. You idiot! What's that? It sounds like you know when you bust bubble. You know that popping sound from bubble wrap. That's exactly what it sounded like, and I knew real quick. I just did a normal tour. Saw action, which I wasn't expecting to see as much as I did because everybody told me the war was over. No, not quite. And I think Scott will tell you, after a while you sort of become cold and unattached to reality. And I even extended for a second tour because I knew what was going on back here and I didn't want to face that. And I didn't get into that second tour because just as my first tour was ending, 5 days before my birthday, I was wounded, and they decided what the hell. And plus, the Marine Corps stopped all ground operations on my birthday. So there was no more of that. Supposedly, we weren't in it anymore, which turned out to be a lie as well. But like I said, there's not much for me to say. I eventually wound up the M60 gunner, like you mentioned, and just to let people know how hazardous being an automatic weapons man is. The two targets that I didn't know when I first got there, the enemy liked to take out the radio man and the M60 man. And I couldn't figure out why everybody was so willing to let me take the M60 over there. you know, with the concentration of fire was always in my direction. And this does not, these guys don't even know me. Do they hate me more than the rest of my people? But that's pretty much my final year and a half. I was stationed at Pendleton, and they stuck me with a combat engineer unit. What the hell did I know about combat engineers? So I said, they'll make me a brig chaser. And a brig chaser is and gets put on a really pretty white duty belt and carries a nightstick, and you go to the prison and you escort the prisoners like to the dentist or wherever they want to go. And the problem with that is, when you go to the chow hall, there's a section in the chow hall for the prisoners, and they get to eat. You don't get to eat. You go hungry. You have to stand there and watch them eat. And when they're done, you leave with them. And you just wait until dinner time, you know, that's about it. But I was gonna re-enlist, and there's a long story behind why I didn't, and it's, don't wanna get into that. But there's one thing I wanted to bring, I always enjoy talking about other people. My girlfriend, who is not here, her father was on the Hornet when it was sunk, but he was also a naval photographer, and the famous pictures you see of the raid over Tokyo, the planes all taken off and all that, well, that was her father that took those pictures. And right now, in our garage, when he passed away, we found a sealed olive green metal box, and it's property of the United States Navy, and we don't know how to open it up. And I tried to talk her into giving it to the Navy. You know, it could be some very historic stuff, or what I'm worried about, it might just be a little home movie thing of hoochie coochie girls. It was on Liberty, and I'm scared to death of doing that. So I don't want to your father what reminded me of all of this is she spent many years in Oglala. And that's where she got married, and she lived there for many years, although she grew up and went to high school in Hollywood, of all places. She lived across the street from Universal Studios, and Bob Hope's daughter was her playmate. She knows all of these movie stars, and she hates when I bring that up. She goes, no, don't do that. But I do it just to irritate her, you know. That's about it. Like I said, it was not much about me at all. It's I was just a standard muddy boot and did the best I could. And there was, you know, a few funny stories, but you might not be able to relate to them, so I just won't even.
Thank you, Don. Mike Autry.
Yeah, I was drafted in November of 1966, and was sent over to Vietnam in April 19th of 1967. A lot of you probably remember that was the Summer of Love. Not so much. I spent a year as an infantry grunt over there. And like Don said, there's a lot of stories that, you know, I have that I don't really want to talk about. I don't know what else to say that other than it was just the most horrendously terrible year I ever spent in my life, dodging bullets and booby traps and punji pits and all those things like that that make war hell. And then after 1967, 1968 turned around, I thought it'd be okay, except then they had this party called Tet, the first Tet offensive, and I'm sure Scott can understand that one. And after that, it was just come home and try to deal with it. I got sent back to Fort Knox, Kentucky for 4 months, and of all things, they put me in a tank. Because I was a grunt for a year in Vietnam, then they gave me a tank in Kentucky. And I spent the rest of my tour, 2 years, driving a tank in an APC in Fort Knox. And that's about it.
Your hero badges.
What?
What hero badges?
They speak for themselves. I don't need to worry about that. Anyway, they're over there in the cases if you want to look at them.
Okay, Bob Campbell.
Well, I was in the first Cav Army in Vietnam, 69 to 70, and so there's not much. Oh, well, I didn't have an M60, I had a P 25, so I was a radio operator. And, I always think my claim to fame is not me being a veteran, although I'm honored to be a veteran with all the other veterans. But I worked with a Marine that was there when they stood up the flag in Iwo Jima, and I worked with a man that was a carpenter at Pearl Harbor on December 7th when it was attacked, and he was working that day, and a P-38 pilot from World War II, and of course my dad was World War II also, and he made bombing charts and things, and he was stationed in Algiers, Tunis, and all over Africa and that theater. So I've known some awesome veterans, and that's it, I guess.
Roy Jones. Where's Roy?
It's over here.
Well, I didn't think I'd give a speech today, but I had just moved to Winters and dropped out of college, and the worst thing to do is when you drop out of college, you get drafted. So I got drafted, so I blame Winters on that. And I was a Chet replacement, talk about Chet. A lot of guys were wounded and killed, and so I went over and spent 14 months in country. I was up for the 1st Infantry Division as an infantryman along the Cambodian border. And after that, I came home and I was diagnosed with a low PTSD, and they let me come home. And I don't actually serve 19 months, but that was good enough for them. They told me they'd call me or write me a letter if they needed me again, and they never did. So I'm hoping Winters.
Okay, well, that's the last veteran I have on the list, but we have some family members there who would like to talk, say a few words about some of their relatives who are veterans. And so if each of you would say a few words, it's getting a little late in the day, so we're trying to hope we can speed it up a little bit. Janet Martin.
Whoa. That's a surprise. Well, stand up. Do I have to? I can Jim McCoey and I were friends from 1st grade, and the good Lord saw fit to have us reconnect when we were in our 60s, and we thanked him every day for the 11 years that we had together. And he had 3 daughters, so they're my stepdaughters, and they're wonderful. Jim passed November 6th of last year, and he was a hero, true hero. And I heard many, many stories, and you talk about the PTSD, and he was definitely in denial. His company or unit, I'm not sure how that all goes, they get together every year and have a reunion. This year it's going to be in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And so as a widow, to honor Jim, I'm going. And another widow from Florida who lost her husband just days after Jim, she's also going to go. So we figured that's going to be our way of honoring our men. And boy, I don't know what to say. We had Jim's services on December 3rd. And I imagine there were over 300 people who knew him and honored him. Bless God.
Thank you.
And yeah, he was just a winter's kid. did go to college, so he did enlist and went to basic, and then joined the OCS group and was a 101st Screaming Eagle, proud of it. And when hospice came in to help us, one of the nurses was asking Jim about it, and he was pretty humble about it. And I said, you know what, Jimmy, you were a badass. That's all there is to it. And she got a kick out of it. And I said, well, how else can you describe, an infantryman who was probably 24 years old, had a bunch of kids, he called them kids, that he had to make sure he kept alive to go back home. The pressure was intense, and in those days, when he went, he served 8 months in combat. They dug holes every night to sleep. And I don't know, he's just my hero, and a hero to a lot of people.
Thank you. Carolyn Tortosa.
Oh, I didn't notice.
You read it.
My dad was my hero too. He was a great guy. He had a heart of gold, and he served with Patton. And they walked from France to Austria on foot. And I still have the map of where he had walked. And he never talked about the war a lot. We saw a lot of shows on TV, but he served with Jack DeGracia, who was his best friend, and they were in the military together the whole way through. And then they had babies about 2 weeks apart when he came home. And and he was my godfather. Yeah. But anyhow, I still have Dad's uniform. And I have the map. And I have his papers when he left. And he was just a kid. I think he was 18 years old when he left. Howard and I are going to try to travel the route that he went on. We're going to take the map and travel the route. That's my thing. It's on my bucket list to do that. Because I guess he came home to be 98 pounds. Some of the uniform is really tiny. Mom always said that when he came home, it took a long time. Because he used to have the nightmares really bad, and he sweats in the middle of the night. And nothing really got to him, when we were kids. We do stuff, and I think it's because he saw all of that, nothing really kind of got to him. It was I was a kid too, or whatever. I think it's just that he saw a lot of death and that sort of thing, and he was just a happy guy to be around, and glad to be around.
Nancy Button Young, whose father was one of my close friends growing up.
Yes, and like you, my dad at 17, joined the Army Air Corps. Wanted to fly his whole life. As a child, would build model airplanes. Wanted to get his wings, wanted to get a pilot and go fly those planes in combat, but he never, the war was over before he actually saw active duty. But he did earn his wings, and he was very happy about that. Learned to fly, and flying became a lifelong hobby. He got, actually once he was discharged, he went into the reserves for a while. And then when I was about 5 or 6 years old, he bought his own private plane. And the first trip he took me on was to Disneyland when it was brand new. And then I went to college in Flagstaff, Arizona, Northern Arizona University, and he used to fly flying me back and forth, so the two of us. He would show me how to do the altimeter and so he loved airplanes his whole life, but he did get to have the training with the military. Always was disappointed he didn't get to see active combat, but we're all really glad that he didn't have to do that.
Lorie Alexander Lindsey.
Well, my son Alex enlisted in the Marine Corps in 2003, and he was very affected by 9/11. And so he enlisted, and he was with the 3rd Air Marine Corps. And he went to Iraq for 7 months. He was with a helicopter unit. And he always wanted to fly, so he was excited to be with the helicopter unit. But then he hurt his ankle. And so when he came back, he did not go for a second tour, but he did go to OCS training, and they accepted him into OCS after he went to a couple years. He didn't really graduate from college. He had like 2 or 3 months left, but he did go to OCS, and he was rejected because of his ankle injury over there in Iraq. But he's doing great now, and he's a nut broker, selling nuts, all the nuts and winners. And he's doing very... What? Oh, and that's his uniform there. And this is his uniform over here. And my father, too, William Alexander, some of you know him. He was with the Marines. And we had a ranch. And my dad passed away in 2004. So, but he's proud to be a Marine. So.
Ms. Coman. Ms. Young.
Coman. But I'm talking about the mix. So my dad, Corbin, and my uncle Ernie were both in World War II. As Bill said, Ernie was flying missions in Europe, and my dad didn't leave the country. He was building and maintaining the ships here. I forget where. When I was growing up, I wasn't so interested. So didn't pay attention. But they were both very proud of serving their country, and they had quite a few fun yet heated arguments with Graf, who was a Marine, with Coman, who was a Marine, and they were not. And so there was a little bit of a back and forth about which was the better of the armed forces. And it was because of the GI Bill that they got into medical school, and it was because of the GI Bill and medical school that they got to Winters. They grew up in Texas, but spent over half their lives in Winters, and I'm very proud that they're here on the wall. I think they're
Dr. Cohen.
I did not know this was going to happen. I didn't either. Gloria, blame her.
Listening to everybody talk, I've had people in this service, my grandfather, my parents, or my dad, all my cousins, all my uncles, from World War I to Vietnam. And then when 9/11 happened, my son was 22, and he started talking about it. And whoa, you know. So he didn't go in. He didn't enlist, so I dodged a bullet there. Then my daughter graduates high school in 2002, and after a few years of junior college and working and getting on with her life, she came to me and said, Mom, I could go to junior college forever and make $10 an hour. I want to go into the Air Force. I went, what? I'm not a military mom. So in 2006, at 22 years old, she joined the Air Force Reserve. She was going to go in January, but couldn't make weight. She had to weigh 110 pounds. She finally got up to 106 pounds, and they took her in June. So we went to San Antonio. She went through all that, and what she did is went to school for dental assistant. So that's what she was doing with the reserve. Well, they do humanitarian missions. Her first mission was in Indonesia in 2008, I think. They were a day late getting there, so they just got to their hotel, and the twin hotels got bombed. So she was in that, and she said she had to climb through 5 stories of rubble to get out. Unharmed, didn't hurt any of them. Went on with their mission. Well, in the meantime, I heard about it on the news. I'm on the phone to everybody I can think of. And finally, her commander at Gale calls me and said they'll try to get a hold of her. They got a hold of her, and I get a call at 3 in the morning, and she's madder than heck. Why are you calling everybody? So I told you I'm not a military mom. I'm new at this. So she got through all that, and the next mission was in New Hope, Alaska. They go to New Hope, Alaska. They have to leave quickly because of weather, and they're flying in their helicopters, and a helicopter goes invert and starts to fall. Pulls it out just in time. Tells me about it when she got home. I'm like, tell them you can't go anywhere. Stay home. She goes again to a Belize. She gets sick in Belize, but wouldn't go to the hospital. Anyway, she spent 6 years in reserves, got out. She did have some issues with night terrors and stuff from Indonesian thing. Now she's married and has a 6.5-year-old, and she's working in the dental field, got a career out of it, and she's doing really well.
Mayor Bill Biasi.
Thank you. I have 6 uncles who grew up here in Winters, who all served in the armed forces in various branches. I don't have a lot of stories from them, but I have 3 uncles on my dad's side, my Uncle Joe, my Uncle Vito, and my Uncle Pat, who all served, and 3 uncles on my mom's side, my Uncle George, my Uncle Chuck, and my Uncle Bill. I was fortunate enough to, we celebrated my Uncle Bill's 90th birthday a couple weeks ago, and he was telling us some of the stories of some of the things that happened when he was there. One of the things that really struck me was he told us stories about working. He was in the Air Force, he was a mechanic, and he worked on the X-1. He worked with Chuck Yeager when they were trying to break the sound barrier. He worked very closely with him, and I want to get in touch with him again and try to record some of these stories that he told me so that we can have that for our history. I'm thankful to all the veterans here from Winters and from all over who served, so thank you all.
Okay, that's the last. I would close by saying I had 5 first cousins who were older than I was, who were in the Second World War. 2 in the Marines, 2 in the Air Force, 1 in the Army. The one in the Marines was all through the Pacific where they were retaking all the islands. And the one in the Army was in the Battle of the Bulge. My heritage is German, so I think I had cousins on both sides of the Battle of the Bulge. But they all survived, so that's good. Okay, that concludes this part.
Can I say one more thing? I don't know if any of you are going to be here on Memorial Day, but every year the VFW puts on a wonderful service at the cemetery. And if you have the opportunity to go, I would suggest that you go because they provide speakers, and you'll just be so proud of the veterans and the folks who serve our country. So I'm giving a plug to the VFW and their Memorial Day service because I'm sure they're going to have one again this year.
Now we want to hear about a little bit different about the museum. Rob, are you going to talk about docents?